Hello my friends, hope you are well. Today I've got 3 really easy little bases you can whip up at home for your miniatures, so let me show you how to make them.
Swamp Rat Miniatures.
And actually, just as a quick side note, I'll be showing you the materials and process I use to make these bad boys, but you can substitute in any similar techniques or materials you like. This is mainly just to give you a bit of inspiration and show how easy it is to make interesting bases like this. So first up is what I've been calling the Mossy cave base, and it's supposed to represent just that really, a mossy cave environment with these stalagmites poking up out of the ground for visual interest and maybe some mushrooms thrown in for good measure. This would work well for a bunch of miniatures, but especially so for gloomspite gits or some other cave dwelling goblin creatures. To start this off, I simply build up a rough and rocky base layer using some scraps of cork sheeting, and I'm gluing down a couple of larger pieces to cover the vast majority of the base, but don't go completely to the edges as you want to leave a bit of room to add your stalagmites in a moment. I chuck another piece or 2 of cork on top of the base layer to get a bit of elevation going, and then it's onto those stalagmites. All I do for these guys is cut a piece of 1mm steel wire and bend it into an L shape, which makes it easier to attach them as I can then just push the bottom piece of wire into the cork to secure it. It's good to make a few different sizes of these so you have a bit of natural variation going on, and once they're in place I give them a thin coating of hot glue. This is to bulk out the wire into the actual stalagmite shape, and I'll usually do a few coats of this, trying to keep them relatively thin but giving them a nice lumpy rocky appearance. The next stage is kind of optional depending on the texture you want for your rocky areas, but I like to glue on a few extra little pebbles from this basin mixture stuff and then also sprinkle on some of the finer sandier stuff, as this helps to add a bit more texture and blend your cork layers together. And as I said earlier, you don't need to use a specialised basin mixture like this, any little rocks or sand will do. After that, I just want to stick on a few happy little mushrooms. I'm using these Green Stuff World resin ones, but in the past I've made them from milliput, which is also really easy to do. And one thing I will mention here is that it's good to test out where you'll place your miniature as you build your base, as you don't want to end up adding a mushroom or a rock or whatever else in an area you want your miniature to stand. I'm just using these as examples today, but yeah, make sure to test out your miniature placement as you build the base, otherwise they might not already fit together nicely. The last step in the building process is to use some mud mix to add some texture to the stalagmites and maybe some areas of the cork. This is a mixture I've made from sand, wall filler, paint and PVA glue, which I've shown in previous videos, but you can also buy these texture pastes from brands like AKA Interactive or Vallejo. They just end up being a bit more pricey. Anyway, I let that all dry and then it's onto the painting. So I've primed these bases in black as it's a good foundation for building up rocky grey colours, and all I'm doing to start with is overbrushing on 3 different layers with a dark, medium and a light grey, applying each lighter colour to a slightly smaller surface area than the last. Next, I'm adding a few washes to help tint the greys into a bit more of a natural rocky colour, since rocks are never just pure grey, and I use a dark green wash of Athonian Camo Shade, followed by a brown wash of Agrax Earth Shade and a final black wash of Nuln Oil. And the process here is similar to that of the greys we just did. I apply the green wash to quite a wide surface area, the brown on top of that in a smaller one, and the black in the smallest area, mainly focused on the deepest crevices, making sure to allow each wash to dry thoroughly before applying the next. I then use a pale sandy colour to dry brush the entire base lightly, which helps to blend everything together and add more nice rocky colours into the mix. And once that's done, I use a small brush to start painting in some nice little mossy spots using a darker green and then a lighter green on top of that. You don't need to be very precise with this, a more random pattern is better, just try not to go too over the top with it. I do a quick touching in with my original pale grey colour for any areas that are now looking a bit too saturated with washes or mossy greens, and after that I finish off the painting step with the mushrooms, going for a fairly neutral tan or beige colour on the stalks, followed by a dark wash and some more bold reds and purples for the actual mushroom caps, with a few little white dots here and there. I like my mushrooms to stand out quite a lot like this, but you might want to use some dark browns if you want a more subtle look. As a finishing touch for these guys, I like to use a bit of watered down PVA glue and sprinkle on some fine flock just to add to that mossy texture I want, and make sure to tap off any excess, but if you're happy with how they looked after painting, you can just skip this step altogether. After a quick rim job, your mossy cave base is now complete. Pretty cool. So yeah, I really like these bases, and you just saw how quick and easy they are to make, but I have another base that I use regularly that is even quicker and even easier to make. The swamp base. So I thought it might be a bit cheeky to show this base in the video, as I have shown it a few times in my Swamperial Guard army build videos, but I know not everyone watches those and I just think it's a really cool little base, so we're doing it anyway. And the building phase for these is one step. You basically just want to slop on some of your mud mixture or texture paste onto a base, and I like to use my brush to create little divots and dips into the mud where I can add my swampy goo stuff later. Give the mixture time to dry fully and we're straight into the painting. The painting process for this base is equally as simple as the build phase, so after priming with a dark brown, all I do is start by dry brushing on 2 different layers of brown, using something fairly rich like Mornfang brown for the first coat, and then something a bit paler than that for your second. I then stipple on a murky green colour to start building up a damp look to the mud, and once that's dried, I apply 2 layers of washes in the dipped areas I want my goo, using that dark green wash from earlier first, letting that dry, and then coming back in with a black wash, using a slightly smaller surface area. This is just to darken down these areas and make them look a bit moist, giving a good foundation to add some swamp goo. I'm specifically using this AK Interactive Swamp Green Water Gel stuff, whatever the hell it is, as I think it works quite well, but you might have one you prefer more, in which case I will permit you to use that one instead. And the process for this stuff is really easy. I just use a brush to kind of stipple on a layer of it, let it dry thoroughly, and then add another coat or 2 on top of that if it's not looking dank enough. You don't need to be very precise with this really, and being a bit messier will help it look a bit more natural, so no worries there. But once it's set, you'll have something looking like this, a nice dank and glossy swampy green goo. Lovely. And of course, no swamp would be complete without some plant life, so again, you can use whatever swampy plants you like, but I usually gravitate towards this shrubbery stuff. I think it's from Green Stuff World, and you basically just pull off little lumps of this to add these nice little leafy nodules into place. I also like these dumb cane plants from Gamer's Grass. I don't think this is necessarily a swamp plant in real life, but I think it works well on these bases and looks pretty cool placed around the edges of your pools of swamp goo. After another rim job to seal the deal, your swampy bases are now finished. And I know these are really simple in design, but for the actual ratio of time investment to finished appearance, I think these are really cool, and I love using versions of it for the kitbashed army I'm working on currently. Now, for the final base, we'll do something a little bit more involved, but still very simple and easy overall. The trench base. To get this one kicked off, I'm cutting up some XPS foam and gluing it down onto one side of the base to create a kind of trench wall profile. And this is achievable on your larger bases, but probably not so much on your smaller 25mm bases, in which case we'll just add a little chunk here and do something different with it in a moment. Now, the most important thing for these larger trench bases is to create a really cool looking retaining wall that's used to stop the mud from collapsing back into the ditch. And you can use a ton of different things for this. Like you just saw me using some wire sandwich bag tie things on one side to create a kind of corrugated metal sheet effect, and then use a bunch of matchsticks and chopped up coffee stirrers to build up some wooden sections. In a real trench, you'd be likely to find this wooden and metal sheeting stuff with some extra wooden supports to hold it all into place. So you can build up a really cool look with anything that can mimic these items. For this medium-sized base, I made a smaller trench wall profile, making it look a bit more shallow, like it's the end of a trench or quite a hastily prepared one. And for this small base, I chopped off some of the foam to create a little muddy slope, and then attached some offcoats of coffee stirrers to act as duckboards on the floor, just trying to incorporate some similar trench elements to keep it identifiable. The next stage is to add some more of the mud mixture you saw in the previous bases, but before I do that, I make a few small holes in the foam that will act as craters or puddles later on. I then slop on the mud, covering up the foam and also the plastic base itself, then add some more of the coffee stirrer offcuts onto this larger base to act as duckboards on the trench floor, and for this medium base I use the leftover legs from some unfortunate Cadians to add a muddy trodden up texture, just mixing it up a bit from the previous one. Once the mud dries, these trenches are pretty close to finished. They just need a few little extra greebles to make them feel more lived in. The majority of the pieces I'm using to greeble out these trenches today are leftovers from 40k Imperial Guard sprues, but you can find items like these in any kind of military or army based miniature sets. You just want to be adding stuff that will enhance the look, you know, stuff you'd expect to find in trenches like sandbags and weaponry. This shovel felt like a great addition to the medium base, and the small base was feeling a little bit empty, but after pushing a mortar shell into the dip I made earlier, it felt much more like something you'd expect to see on a battlefield. Now, on to the painting. These bases also got primed up in brown since there's a lot of mud and wooden details, and this made painting in the planks a lot easier, starting with a nice rich Mournfang brown and then dry brushing on some Steel Legion drab to tone it down a bit. I then use a small brush to go around and add little lines and scratchy bits using other lighter shades of brown and tan colours, just trying to build up a natural kind of wood grain effect. And I did end up taking this a bit too far in some places, so I used some snakebite leather contrast paint to blend those spots together a bit more, and this gave the wood quite a nice hue actually, so I'll probably try this out more in the future. I ran a dark brown wash down between the individual planks to add some definition there, then gave the wood a final light dry brushing of a dusty sandy colour to help everything look a bit more worn. The dark green wash then came back out, using it around the lower portions of the retaining wall to look like water from the ground was seeping up into the planks, and also around the edges of the duckboards on the small base to look like they're sinking into the wet mud. I used some more black wash to reinforce the green slightly, just add into the overall damp appearance, then move on to any metallic areas. For these bits, I just overbrushed on a dark metallic colour first, being careful not to get this onto any of the wooden areas we've just finished off, then slosh on a bit more of that dark brown wash to add a bit of grunginess into the mix. Since trenches are usually quite damp and miserable places, I also use some rust effect paint to add a bit of a rusty patina on the metal items. And I use dirty down rust for this, but again, any rust effect will work well, or just stipple on some brown and orange paints to build up a nice layer of rust. The mud was my next target, for which I gave it quite a simple paint job, kind of stippling on a couple of brown colours to pick up some of the texture from the mud paste, then following it with a muddy green colour faintly brushed on also. I used my green wash from earlier to add more of a dark and wet hue to some of the areas of mud, especially into those little craters I made, and then just gave it one final light dusting with a brown colour, focusing on any areas I darkened down too much. At this point, the only unpainted areas are all the little greebles I glued on a moment ago, so I'll touch those up quickly. Nothing crazy here really, I'm sure you all know how to paint these little miniature pieces, so I won't bother showing you too much of that. Just try and keep them a bit dirty and grungy to fit with the trench aesthetic. And my final little touch in this painting stage was to use some brush on gloss varnish around the duckboards on the floor, in the small craters, and some other areas in the mud. This stuff will go a long way in giving the appearance of surface water when it's dried thanks to its glossy finish, and I highly recommend this for anything trench related. To finish the base off completely, I like to add a few of these dead grass coloured tufts very sparingly to fit the aesthetic, and to push that wet effect from the gloss varnish even further, I'm just using a drop of this water effect stuff in each of the small craters to look like rainwater that's collected. I've used AK Interactive still water effect for this, but you can use any other similar product. And with that, our trench bases are finito. For me, the water effect from the gloss varnish and the actual still water mixture really pushed the trench base forward and sell the effect of it being a damp and miserable battlefield setting. You can get a good look without it, you know, and some trenches would actually be in a dry setting, but yeah, I just think this last detail will really push it over the edge, and I can almost see some Krieg infantry running around in here, so yeah. There we have it, my friends. 3 really cool looking bases that are quick and easy to make at home using cheap components and leftovers that you probably have from other projects. Let me know which of these is your favourite and if you'll be using any of them for your miniatures, and if there's anything you need a bit of clarification or extra detail on, drop a comment down below and I'll come back to you as soon as possible. If you enjoyed this video, then please like and subscribe to my channel, where you'll find similar stuff to this in my previous videos and even more stuff like this coming in the future. And if you've got any bases you'd like to see me attempt, let me know down below. As always though, I have been your friendly neighborhood swamp rat, and I will see you very soon in another video. See ya.